Hey, welcome CSC 200 class. This is ex6. I'm not sure what we're going to call it yet, but we're going to make like a SpongeBob database, and we're going to do it just to get some practice writing some SQL statements. We're going to go back to W3 schools, and we're going to be going through a lot of these areas of the SQL tutorial just to get familiar with writing these statements so that when we work on our PHP pages, we'll know how to write the statements. We haven't done a whole lot of these statements yet. We've done a couple of them, but we're going to do a little bit more. So we're going to be kind of working through here, finding some certain things, and we're going to create a database from scratch. And we're just going to do kind of a goofy database. We're just going to do a SpongeBob one. I used to do them with Access as well, so since people know a lot of the SpongeBob characters, and we're going to do that first. And I'll show you a finished version, not a finished version, but just one that I had started. And this is one that we could do just for ex6. There's just 6 records in our database, and this is kind of the browsed version. And you could see there's SpongeBob, Patrick, Sandy, Eugene Krabs, Squidward, Tentacles, and Poppy Puff characters from SpongeBob, and we could certainly add more. And as far as columns at the top, you can see they have an ID, and they have an ID starting with 101, and I'll show you how we can create a different number other than just 1. So we can make a custom number so that if you had to make an ID number, it doesn't always have to be 1, 2, 3. It can be 1001 or whatever. We also have a last name, first name, species. We're going to use species. We're going to use a city, and we're going to put a default value in there. Since they're all going to be Bikini Bottom, we might as well put a default in there. And we're going to also do something called an enum, where you basically have a choice between M and F for male and female as far as their gender. And we're going to just kind of, some of these we'll put in at first, some of them we'll add in later, but we'll get some experience working with the different SQL statements. And, I don't have this totally scripted out, so, we'll make some mistakes. We'll try some things as we go in order to learn more about the SQL language. Now, let me just show you the structure that we have here. These are the columns, and this is the way they're set up. You can see we have an ID, which is a primary, because it has the primary key there. It's an integer. It's set up to auto-increment, so it'll automatically just kind of add numbers to it as we add records. We have a last name, first name. They're all just the varchar or varchar, however you want to say it. And we have a city, we have a default of Bikini Bottom, and we even have a gender, which is called an enum, which basically puts the values in a parentheses with quotes. So nothing too difficult as far as what we're doing here. And we're going to do everything, including create the database right from scratch. And we're going to do it in phpMyAdmin, but we're going to do it all with SQL statements. So, we could just like insert and use all these little buttons here to do it, but we're going to try to write the language and learn the language a little bit by going back and forth between W3 schools. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to delete this. So I'm going to go into my localhost, and I'm going to go to databases, and I'm going to go to, and actually, you know what? I should probably do it this way. I'm going to go to my SQL for my localhost, and I'm going to do drop. And drop's coming up there, and I'll do it in caps. And it's database. And the database I'm going to drop is going to be SpongeBobDB. So I'm going to type that out. And it's all lowercase and then a capital DB. That's at least the one I have right now. And I'll put a semicolon to end that. So I'm going to drop database SpongeBobDB. We'll see if that works. I'll hit go. And it's gone. So it's over there. And the first thing I'm going to want you to do is just to practice this, is just to go into your local host with nothing here and just practice writing SQL statements to create and drop. And you might say, well, I'm not sure how to do that. Well, you're going to go to your SQL tutorial, and you're going to see all these tutorial things up here. Now, these are kind of when you're working with a database, but before you even have a database, you're going to go down into this kind of middle section down here where they have create DB, drop DB, and these are pretty easy. If you click on them, I mean, there's not a lot of code here. You could just, a lot of the times we're just going to copy and paste stuff. So I'm going to copy create database, and I'm going to go to MAMP or phpMyAdmin, and I'm just going to go to the SQL area, and I'm just going to paste it in here. And if you need more room, if you hover over here, you should be able to stretch it out. Now it says test DB. I'm going to just do one called sample DB. Just try it out, just practice it. Call it sample with a capital DB and hit go. And if you get an error, you fix it. So I'm going to hit go, and there it is. It made one called sample DB. Now we're not going to use sample DB right now, so I'm going to drop it, and then I'm going to drop it. So I'm going to type drop. And it's drop database. Now it doesn't hint here of what it should be, so use this SQL. Keep them both open, and you can go here and see what it says. Oh, it says drop database and then the database name. So that's pretty easy. So I'll go drop database, and it's helping me out a little bit here. And again, I'll do a sample, and I don't know if sample will come up, but I'll do sample DB just like it is over here, and I'll put a semicolon and I'll drop it. If it's green, that's good. If you see pink, it means there's some kind of problem. So I dropped it and I don't see it over here. So I learned how to do that. So that's just creating and dropping a database. That's pretty easy. Okay, now we're going to create one for real now, and we're going to make a SpongeBob one. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to phpMyAdmin, and we're going to use SQL, and make sure you're in your local host up here. Make sure you're not in another database. And what we're going to do, and we don't need to get autosave, we can just type this, and we're going to say create database. And you could click on the ones that come up, and you could have copied and pasted as well. I'm going to make a new one called SpongeBob, and I'll use all lowercase other than the DB. So this is my database name, not my table, my database name. So I'm going to do that, and I'll put a semicolon, and I'll hit go. Okay, and there it is. So it was created. So I could even go in here and create a table. Now, normally we'd create a table in here, and that's how you could do it with all the tools in phpMyAdmin, but we're going to try to do things using all code. This would be the difference, if you were doing HTML and using Dreamweaver or something like that and actually writing HTML code. So we're going to try to write the code so we know how to do it. So what we're going to have to do here is create a table. Now, how do you create a table? Well, let's go look. Create a table. Now this will be a little more detailed, because we're not just going to create a table, just one table. We're going to put the columns in here. Now they have one here that's kind of persons, and you could go in here and you could practice with the one they have in here, but we're going to create one with SpongeBob. Now we're going to add a little bit to here. So I'm going to copy this. I'll hit the try it yourself. It doesn't matter. It's the same code anyway, so I guess it doesn't matter if you hit the try it yourself button. But I'm going to copy all of this, and I'm going to go to phpMyAdmin. And I'm going to stretch this out because I might have a little bit more here. So I'm going to stretch this out, and I'm going to paste this in. And notice I have my text really big right now because my eyes aren't really good. So I have it really big, and it's saying create table persons. And it's okay if it's breaking these lines. It doesn't matter where you break the lines. Sometimes it helps. And it's saying, now we're going to change some of these because it says person ID. We'll just call it person. We're not going to call it persons, we'll call it characters. Now be careful, because you'll see a thing called character, which may be a key word. So if you do it lowercase and you call it characters, it shouldn't be, even if you do it like that. Well, don't do that. Actually, just type it out. I know that's a hard word, but do characters. And if you don't see any kind of red X there, you're okay. So we're going to create a table called characters, because these are the characters in SpongeBob. And we'll just make an ID with a capital ID, an integer. We have last name, first name. Instead of address, we'll have species. We're going to put species, so whether they're a crab or a starfish or a sponge or whatever they are, we'll have species. And we'll also have a city. And what we'll do for city is we'll put a default in there. Now we'll figure out how to do all this. Now these are okay. Last name, first name, species. We could leave varchar 255. You can shorten them, but you could just leave them 255. Now this ID integer, this is a little more, there's more we have to do here. So we could look at a couple things with this. So when we're dealing with our, we want it unique. And there's a couple things you could check out. It says unique. And if you read about unique, I think it even says a primary key constraint automatically has unique. So we don't have to put unique, because if we make it a primary key. Now when you make it a primary key, one thing to point out, it shows you the different ways to do it. It actually puts primary key at the end. So I could even copy this if I want to. I'll just copy that and I'll put it at the end. Then I don't have to worry about the primary key. I'll just put it at the end here. Now if you're going to put another statement or another element, I'm just going to make sure I put a comma there. And if you're not sure, just go back and look, make sure they have a comma, and they do. They have a comma before they say primary key, but you won't have a comma at the end. So right before your parentheses closes, you don't have a comma. So I will not have a comma here. So I do have primary key, and I'm indicating that it's ID. So that has a capital ID, this has a capital ID. So I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I want to make sure, however I name them, they're the same. So I have primary key ID, but there's more I want to put in here too. I have primary. I also want to make sure it's not null, meaning that something has to be in there. I'm also going to auto increment it. And we've done that before. We just had phpMyAdmin do it. And we could look at some of the things here that are doing it. And you can see here they put primary key with it. That's with SQL Server. We're using the MySQL version. And they have not null. So we could put in not null. We could just type that in. And I'll put it before the comma, because that's all part of, I'll put not null. And it's giving me these kind of X's here. That's because I don't have a comma in here yet. If I put a comma, that should go away. So if you see any things here, you know, it'll usually give you pretty nice error messages of what's going on. So I'm going to put not null. Now also another thing I'm going to put in here is auto-increment. And if you're not sure about any of these things, you know, here's not null. And it tells you exactly what not null is, that it doesn't accept null values, meaning you have to have something in there. So we're putting not null, that's for the ID number. And we already have primary key, and we're going to use something called auto-increment. Now auto-increment we've used before, we just haven't typed it in, and it just says auto-increment. That's all we have to have, auto-increment. Now one thing before I copy and paste this in, or you could just type auto-increment, they have another statement called alter table, and you can actually start it at a certain number. And we're going to do that. We could start it at 100, we could start it at 1,000 or 1,001, whatever you want to do. And you know, that kind of, instead of just having a 1, 2, like if you had an ID number, you might want like 5 numbers or something with an ID number starting at 1,000, you know, depending what you're doing. So we'll start at 100 just like they have here. So I'm just going to copy this one and put it in. And where I'm going to put that, that's going to be a separate statement. That you can't put in with your other one. You actually have to kind of establish it first and then put auto increment with a value in. And I'm going to copy this and put this up here so it does auto increment. So it's going to do ID integer not null auto increment, and let's just make sure we have it okay. We're not missing any commas or anything like that. Just looking at some of these. ID integer not, see there's no commas anywhere in here until after the whole kind of part that has to do with ID. So it's creating a table, and these are basically the columns that are getting created. And you could put these all in one line, but it's a lot easier to put them on separate lines like this. And at the end of the statement, after the parentheses, it puts a semicolon. So that's what we did up here. And again, we're putting a second statement saying alter table persons. Now here I messed that up already, so I should copy that and put it here. Make sure I have characters, make sure that's the table I'm working with, and also make sure that I'm in the database, because I'm creating a table, so I have to be in that database. You can't create it over here, because it'll tell you you don't have a database. So if you get that error, and I had it too, if you get that error, said if you go hit your go button and said there's no database, then copy this stuff and make sure you go inside the database and do that. So this should be all we need. Everything looks okay. We have no red X's over here. We'll just double check things. We're creating the characters table, and we have these fields or these columns: ID, last name, species, city, and then we're saying the primary key is going to be ID. So everything should be okay. And then we even have this statement that's going to start, and if you want to start at 101, you could start at 101. You could do that too. Or you could start at 1,001, wherever you want to do it. But we'll start at 101, and that should be good to start. And remember, you could get autosave. So if something gets messed up, you could bring this back. But I'm going to hit go and see what happens. And again, either you'll get green or you'll get pink. Green is good, pink means you have a problem. So I'm going to hit go, and hopefully what it should do, it should create a table in here. All right, and I got green, so everything looks okay. And it made 2 because there's a create table and the alter table. So there's the 2 statements that were in there, and there's my character. So I could click on it here, and I'll just kind of see what I have here: ID, last name, first name, species, city. Now, one thing that I forgot to put in, and I meant to do this, but we could do this after the fact. This is what I mean. If we make a mistake, we'll try and figure it out, because we didn't put any records in. What I wanted to do was put a default value for city of Bikini Bottom, and I forgot to do that. So do I have to do it all over? Do I have to delete the table? You could delete the table. I mean, you could do that, but let's see what happens if we forgot it. We'll kind of, you know, we'll kind of problem solve here. So I forgot to put in the default value. So let's see what we could do after the fact if we can alter our table. Matter of fact, so we're going to have to alter a column, and we want to put in a default value. We'll see if we can do that, because normally what we would do, and I'll just go here, if you look for default value, here's default. And normally what we would do is we would have just put city, and we would have just put default, and we would have put Bikini Bottom. But we forgot to do that. So we're going to have to alter our table. and put that in. So we'll see if we could do that after the fact. So we'll have to alter table. So here they even have alter table if you forgot to do it. So they even have a thing here if you didn't do it. So I'm just going to copy this and I'll alter my table, and then I'll see if I could do it. I'll just go back up to my SQL. Now I'm in the table now. That's where I want to be. I'm in my table for characters, and I'll paste that in, and I want to make sure it's not alter table persons. I'll make it characters. And now that I have characters, it'll come up. So I'll put up characters, and it'll say alter city, and I do have a thing called city, and to set default, and I'll put bikini bottom. And it's a lot easier to do this before you have records in there. So we'll do this first, and that looks okay. Now it's giving me an error. New statement was found, but no delimiter between it and the previous one. Alter table characters, so I'm missing something here. I thought I just copied it, but let's see what it has. I'll hit go, and it worked. So I don't know, it was giving me an error there, but it actually worked. So everything looked okay. So that worked okay. So now it's telling me the default is bikini bottom. So everything's okay with that. So what we're going to start doing now is we're going to start adding some records to here. So maybe I'll stop here. We'll just review what we did real quick, and I'll browse. Now we don't have anything in here to browse because we didn't add any records, but we have our structure set up. We have ID, last name, first name, species, and city. Now we didn't do gender yet. I specifically kind of waited because we're going to add that after the fact just so we can alter a table. Although we just did alter a table there and it worked, although it was a little tricky. If I get autosave query, again, it had some kind of error. I don't know why it was giving me, so it didn't like this set for whatever reason, but it worked. So it wrote it okay. It just didn't like the set here for some reason. So anyway, we're okay so far. So we have our database, we have our table set up, and we have our structure set up with at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns so far, and we're going to make one more for gender. But what we're going to do first is we're just going to add some records to here. So we're going to put some characters in here. So let me stop here, take a break, and then for part 2 we'll start adding our characters or our records into our database.